Up, guys? So I've been watching a guy named Harry Dent for years now, and I've always enjoyed Dent's material. I'm going to link to his stuff here. I think his approach to demographics changed my entire way of thinking as far as, oh, there's an actual day that all of the baby boomers are above the age of 70. There's an absolute fact that like the millennials reach peak spending around 37 to 45. What years are those? 2030, whatever. And so it makes a lot of sense when you look at something demographically and you're like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that kind of does make sense because it's baked into the cake. It's literally in the demographics. Dent likes to take these cycles and stack these cycles on type of cycles. The cool thing about it is he's got a lot of content and materials from the 80s and 90s calling tops or calling bottoms or calling whatever it may be. He's got like a 45-year technology cycle. He's got 90-year long-term debt cycle, as do most people. He's got a peak spending cycle. He's got, all of these different things. However, the one thing that's working against him in all of his calls that he hasn't learned as of yet is that there is one party with a money printer, and they can literally just print and print and print. I think that what he recognizes is that this entire thing is going to literally implode at some point in time because they're just... there was a bottoming cycle clearly that was going to occur in 2019, and it did occur in 2019, and that we saw that show itself in the repo market. And that's a overnight lending market, and the Federal Reserve had to jump into that. This is a market where like large companies, call it like Walmart, has to pay a huge bill, and it might be to like Fruit of the Loom, or they might have to pay something to like Dole, grape juice or whoever it is. They might have to pay several millions of dollars. And based on the cash flows for the week or the month, they may borrow in the overnight lending in the repurchase market. So they might have something like treasury bills on their balance sheet. They may go in there and loan or pledge those and then get a return or borrow against. And what happened is in that market in September of 19, it literally went to 10% overnight loans. Like, that's insane, in a market that's normally like less than 1%. So literally it went insolvent to the tune of $1 trillion. Now you guys know what happened in January, and you know what happened then February and March. And we saw a bottoming, right? We had this big announcement or something's going to happen. Mr. Donald J came out and he's like, I'm going to shut down the economy. And you're like, wait, what? The president can like literally do that? I guess, wow, we've lived maybe in a slave world. Like, this is kind of insane. We didn't really realize. I mean, we knew that they had that power, but we didn't really see it, that they had that power before. And so what occurs there is that you've got a 50%, downtick in the equities. And at that moment in time, that's about appropriately priced based on Dent's cycles. But what they chose to do was print to pump those asset prices back up because they just can't allow asset prices to collapse, especially as the baby boomers are now in their 60s. They could have allowed it in '08, but they chose not to allow it in '08. And they claimed like, oh, well, we can't allow it, even though none of the baby boomers were in their 60s yet. They were like literally, I guess the early ones were, but like most of them were in their 50s. And so it was still like an okay thing to be like, hey, this is recoverable, but they kicked the can. And then in 19, that can kick like came to the end of the road. They get this big event. I personally don't think that event is not planned. And I think it's very convenient. And then they've got like this big excuse to print trillions and trillions of dollars when people were super upset. If you remember back in '08, people were super upset about the auto bailouts because it was like, what the heck is this? But now we don't even think about $50 billion going to the airlines at all. We're like, oh yeah, $50 billion went to the airlines. Like, nobody cares. When in fact, like the answer there was like, no, these people should be out of business. Just is what it is. And new companies should be able to come up and buy those airplanes and lease those things. And like, people should have the opportunity to go maybe grab equity as a smaller airline and become a pilot there. Like you should have allowed the free market to just play itself out throughout everywhere. And we chose, nope, we're not going to do that. So at that point in time, we fundamentally changed the way economics works on everything. Nothing now makes sense because one party at the poker table has a money printer. And so you're always betting like, are they going to keep using the money printer? Are they not going to use the money printer? The only thing in my mind that is self-evident is like at some point in time, this just doesn't work. Central planning doesn't work. Like you can call it the Soviet Union. You can call any of these big, like large centrally planned economies that we've seen in our history. They don't work long term. And they always end, like the more that they try to centrally plan, the worse it gets. And so I think that we're at a spot now where like I continually watch Dent because I really appreciate where he sits with his demographics and his cycles, and he's a crazy boomer, right? He's very boomer. All right. So if you're a young guy, you're watching it, a lot of young guys do not like Dent at all. I appreciate where he comes from with the demographics because it changed a lot on my mental models. I like to stack mental models on top of mental models so I can kind of triangulate the way I see the world and hopefully see it a little bit more clearly so I make better decisions moving forward. But what he's clearly missing at this point in time, as he calls a top after a top after a top, is like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like the idea that the stock market has to go up or has to go down, or it doesn't matter because they can keep asset prices as high as they want to keep them. And they can literally, they can choose two things. They can choose the financial system and allowing it to deflate, or they can choose the currency and allowing it to hyperinflate. So it's like one of the two. In my opinion, I think that they're going to sacrifice the currency because based on their last two actions, 2008 and 2020, they showed us we will print unlimited amounts of money to continually keep asset prices high. Well, the consequences of keeping asset prices high is that you have a younger demographic problem, and this is where I see the real issue coming in the 20s, is these people can't get into housing at all-time highs. These people can't get into the stock market at all-time highs. They shouldn't anyway, right? Like these people, these younger kids are coming into the market at all-time highs with no opportunity. I mean, it's never occurred in their entire adult working life. Has there been a good opportunity? I mean, I graduated high school like right around 08. And so it was like, unless you were dumping into the market at that point in time, you weren't able to get a nice entry point. And so what's occurring here is that you've got the baby boomers who are just whining this thing out for all that it's worth and voting themselves more and more privileges. And then you've got the millennials that are paying the brunt cost of this and are getting completely financially screwed. And I see this going very, very bad long term. Like long term, I see this being like the wealth gap is way too wide. And whenever you get societies with massive wealth gaps, it becomes a very, very big problem. And so I think that what's likely is that the elites will do some sort of form of a digital currency. And I wonder if to get people to accept this, because I think the baby boomers at this point in time wouldn't accept it at this point. I think that there's a lot of them that have been like, we've screwed around with them too much in the last 2 years. Half of them or more are scared and they're still wearing their slave masks and all that other stuff. But the other part of them are like, things don't feel right to me here. And I think that you could get a really negative effect out of these people. And so I wonder if they will allow things to deflate and quote correct so that they can come out and go, hey, look, it's going to be okay. We got this digital currency. We're going to send people this stuff. And further increase their stranglehold over the American economy and basically over the population of America. I think at this point in time, it's pretty obvious that we don't have a government that is self-representative or works for us. I think that we are slaves to the government. I think that is an absolute fact. What can you do about it? You can bet against it. I mean, that's basically what I'm doing is I'm like looking at this. I'm trying to become sovereign in any way that I can. And I'm looking at this situation going like, well, this is a bad situation. But there's a lot of opportunity here. And unfortunately, I think most people are not seeing that opportunity, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. For example, I'll leave you with this. What will the baby boomers do when the inflation narrative becomes true? And I think that we'll know probably mid this year if the inflation continues like it is now. Right now, people are like, oh, it's just temporary. But if it continues, what will they do? What will their financial advisors do with those big 401ks they've built up over 30 or 40 years? Where is that money going to flow? Is it going to stay where it's been for the last 15, 20 years? Or is it going to move to other types of assets? And what assets might those be? What assets are going to benefit from an inflation narrative? And can you get there first? And so I'll leave you guys with that. Thank you for liking, thank you for subscribing. And as always, I will see you down